that there is a difference between sort of picking on each other, and certainly Trump has been a perfect example. I mean, he's literally calling his opponents names, and being more aggressive about pointing out the faults and problems of the other candidate that in fact are relevant to the election. I think Bernie had a hard time in the beginning understanding he could do that. He didn't have to say Hillary's a wonderful person in every way. But he could have said, let's look at her record on Libya. Let's look at her decision-making as Secretary of State, things like that, and been a little more aggressive about it without resorting to name-calling, quote-unquote, going negative. He did a good, he did a mediocre job of promoting his own stuff in a positive way. I think people never really have not really figured it out. I've got a piece I'm working up about paying for Bernie's healthcare plan and how that might work and how other countries do it. We'll take a look. But I mean, just, not to make it sound like I should be running for something, though I'd happy to accept contributions. The idea is that as I'm trying to go through that and I'm looking, well, what are the taxes like in France? How much do people pay in Britain for their free healthcare? I couldn't help but wondering, is there anybody on Bernie's staff who's doing this same thing? I mean, the chart that I found online comparing taxes in these different countries, I mean, nobody in Bernie's staff found that and was able to counter Hillary's argument that we can't afford it. I think he's not done a good job of explaining his own stuff, and I think he's been far too cautious about pointing out Hillary's foibles. And he is where he is now because of that, and he can stay in the race, and that's good, and keep talking, but that campaign manager stuff.
And to his credit, I don't think that the stuff other than the unqualified thing, which I think was just a side effect of the fact that it's been 18 fucking months and it's starting to feel personal, But other than that, he's done a decent job of sort of saying that, couching those criticisms in saying that I think I'm better than her in terms of judgment. And then he started saying things like he would take her over Donald Trump any day, stuff like that. That's how you do it. It's his campaign that is like, one of his surrogates introducing her called Hillary Clinton a corporate whore. They threw money at her SUV going to a fundraiser, not thinking of the optics of throwing, money at women. And I agree that it's a sort of a specious kind of charge, but it does change the conversation then from why they were throwing the money to should they have because of it's sort of bad strategy that way. And, to bring up your talk of his healthcare plan, I've got a story or two on some of the independent analyses of his healthcare plans too. And I think part of what happened was he told his campaign, I want this to be the thing. And they came up with these numbers because they're like, we need to say we're going to do this, but we also need to sell it to people. So they ended up coming up with very, very dubious information. I mean, their first savings amount of what they were going to save in medicine and whatnot was more than America spends on prescription medicine in a year. So then they were like, we meant actually 100,000 less or a million less than we said. Yeah. It was so instead of having a more, either more vague or more fair analysis of his plans, it's been, we put out this sunshine day, sunshine, rainbows, and puppy dogs estimate of how it's going to be, allowing even pro-socialized medicine people to be like, look, they're not being truthful about this. Yeah. So I feel like, he's been underserved by a lot of his campaign staff, save for their fundraising team, because those guys are absolutely killing it.
Well, I mean, holy shit.
I agree absolutely.
I mean, checking when Obama was going around promising you can keep your doctor and your health care plan. I mean, that was always impossible, too.
Where was all that fact checking? That's a hell of a question. The idea that we got sold a bill of goods on the Affordable Care Act is slowly becoming apparent to people, that it is not anything close to the healthcare solution that we needed, that the compromises that were made were such that it basically diluted the whole thing. There's an excellent article last week in the New York Times talking about how, because we insisted on a capitalist model where companies were going to compete for business within the ACA, that a lot of these companies aren't making any money and they're pulling out, reducing the competition and driving up the prices. In addition, as prices go up, Congress is certainly not going to be voting any more money into the pool for the subsidies for poor people, which means more of them are going to be excluded from health care because once again, they're not going to be able to afford it. But again, speaking of fact-checking, allowing Hillary Clinton to kind of get a pass by nodding and saying, well, the Affordable Care Act is, the best we can do, and I'm going to support it without bringing up these kinds of issues, once again points to the question of who's working for Bernie. A classic example, stepping away from healthcare in the last debate, where one of the commentators asked him to name a specific example where Hillary's decisions were influenced by her Wall Street money. Now, first of all, who could not have anticipated something like that? I mean, it was like everybody knew that kind of a question was going to come. Everybody knew it. And the fact that he had nothing to really say, he didn't have any specific examples, nor did he have kind of a witty, pithy remark.
Right.
The media people on Twitter were already bringing up one of her votes, for example, on bankruptcy laws, nearly simultaneous with Bernie stumbling on his own answer. I mean, this was sort of a couple of Google clicks away. This wasn't really hard to come up with. I mean, even a pithy answer like, no, I'm sure they gave her, $500,000 for speeches, hoping there was no influence on her whatsoever. Even something like that.
Or just something saying like you can't prove what, like the reform she didn't pass. I can't show you the bill she didn't sponsor. I mean, that's how you say it. You make it seem like they paid her to do nothing because that's how that argument should play out.
Yeah. Pick one, but have it ready, and yet he didn't have any of those things ready. He just stammered his way through that. The same thing, for example, because we're really what we're doing here is a post-mortem on the Sanders campaign. The same thing on gun control. Hillary has banged him with that every single debate. You'd think by this point in time, Bernie would have something he could say. I mean, she wanted him to apologize to the children of Sandy Hook. I mean, geez, come on. You got nothing on that, Bernie? Nothing?
Yeah.
You don't even, how dare you try to make a tragedy into a political point, Mrs. Secretary? How dare you take the lives of those children and try to manipulate them on this stage? Apologize? I won't apologize to anyone for your action. I mean, I'm just pulling it out of my ass, and it sounds better than what he said.
He should have hired you, really.
Yeah, well,
it's only to do robocalls for him.
Yeah, I'm yelling at people on street corners. In case anybody is on the Upper East Side of New York, I'm available on the bus stop, in fact, as soon as we're off the podcast.
Well, if we're doing a post-mortem on the Sanders candidacy, what about the Sanders revolution? I mean, presumably these people aren't going to go away like Bernie's going to go away. Where do they go, Josh?
Well, I think I think that if the best thing that if Sanders believes in the revolution, the best thing he could do now is bring the sort of spotlight that comes with him now onto the John Fettermans and the other candidates that I'm sure exist in your state, even though you're not going to vote for them until September, and other states where you can say, here's the type of person who shares my values, and this is, he needs to anoint some people, as Goldwater anointed Reagan when he won the governorship, but the other thing that might happen too is it might have worked. Like the message might be in people's heads now, younger voters, that, it might convince them after a devastating loss like this to get more involved and try to have the revolution on the inside. Because trust me, the think pieces will be coming about how, the revolution could continue without Bernie Sanders. And it'll involve things that no one ever wants to do, like get involved with local politics. But if enough people get inspired by it, maybe in 3 elections, the Democrats will nominate their version of Reagan, some, perfect-looking presidential person who's witty and funny and, has terrible ideas.
You're literally talking about a generation. You're talking about a generation later. Peter, are the Bernie voters going to come out and finally fucking vote in the 2018 midterms?
Of course not.
I worry that the Bernie voters, a lot of them, are going to be sucked down that tunnel of that a lot of people felt after 2008, where Obama was supposed to be, was such an inspirational candidate. He brought so many young people into the political process. He brought a lot of middle-class voters enthusiastically into supporting him. And then, nearly from day one, buyer's remorse sunk in, and we were left kind of a cynical bunch of old farts. And so the worry I have is I hope Josh is right. I very much hope I'm wrong. But the worry is that an awful lot of these young people kind of say, the game is rigged. Bernie's right. There's no reason for me to even waste my time on this stuff anymore. What they do in this election is a more immediate question. But, in terms of the long term, I worry that they'll just sort of give up on politics. The best maybe we could hope for is that they turn some of that energy local. But on a national stage, it may be very difficult to bring them back and convince them they can play a role.
Peter, I know you think it's horseshit, but if Clinton were to nominate someone like Elizabeth Warren as her vice president, do you think it, I know you don't think it will happen, but let's, pretend it does. Do a whip it and tell me if you think that would actually pull enough of the Bernie people in to maybe give Clinton some progressive legitimacy and political capital as a president.
No matter what happens, she's going to pick someone more liberal than she is, which isn't that hard to do in that party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, if I can somehow get past the mental block of her choosing a powerful person like Elizabeth Warren, a personality, as well as another woman, I think there would be some hope there. I don't think Hillary can reach out to Bernie's core supporters. I don't think so. But Elizabeth Warren likely could. Possibly would have the best chance, I think, of people doing it. How much she's willing to do that and how much she can do it from, assuming that she doesn't get chosen as vice president, how much she can do it sort of from the sidelines, I'm less clear on. But that might be a way of keeping some of these younger people out of the pit of cynicism, sure.
All right. Well, that seems as hopeful a note to end this show on as any. Next week,
it's positively sunny.